Distinguished guests, please a round of applause for the Nigerian Content Development and Monitoring Board for leading and championing this cause so far. Allow me to recognize the presence of the pioneer Executive Secretary of the Nigerian Content Development and Monitoring Board, Dr. Ernest Wapa, who is comfortably seated here with us. Please, a round of applause.
Development and Monitoring Board, NCDMB.
We can imagine the day when he had dreamed that it would go way beyond the scope of Nigeria across Africa, and here we are today. Welcome, sir. Would also very warmly want to welcome all members of our governing board at the NCDMB who are here present. Please appreciate them. And all members of management and staff of the NCDMB, thank you for putting this together for us. We are live on Arise TV this morning. We are also live on all the social media platforms of the NCDMB. You can find us as official NCDMB. Do we still have a video coming up now? One more video? Please, let's play that. Thank you.
In 2016, the Nigerian Content Development and Monitoring Board, NCDMB, had succeeded in raising the level of Nigerian content performance in the oil and gas industry to 26% from the 5% level that existed before the enactment of the Nigerian Oil and Gas Industry Content Development Act in April 2010. In 2017, the board, under Engineer Simbi Kesie Wabote as the Executive Secretary, launched the Nigerian Content 10-year strategic roadmap, setting an ambitious target of achieving 70% Nigerian content, create 300,000 jobs, and retain $14 billion out of the annual $20 billion spent by the oil and gas industry annually by 2027. This would involve targeted capacity and capability developments for the entire oil and gas industry. It also required the collaboration of the entire industry in developing new oil and gas projects, establishing critical facilities and several other activities across the entire oil and gas value chain and linkage sectors. With local content performance reaching 42% at the end of 2021, the NCDMB is well on track to achieve the set goal of 70% by 2027. This is possible going by the landmark projects that are expected to mature in 2022, like the Nigerian Oil and Gas Park Scheme, Nedo Gas Processing Company, Duport Modular Refinery, Bunor Base Oil Production Plant, and Butane LPG plants in Bauchi and Kaduna. Some other major initiatives will commence this year, like the Brass Island Shipyard, R&D projects, capacity building interventions, NCDMB Conference Hostel Building Project, and many more. Come along with us as we take Nigerian content to greater heights.
Another applause for the Nigerian Content Development and Monitoring Board for exceptional work done these 10 years and more. Before I welcome our chief host to welcome us officially, please ask for a device if you need translation. English is channel 1, French channel 2, and Portuguese channel 3. You will change your channels by clicking the top of the device on my right. When you hold it, it will be on your right side. If you need, please just raise your hands and the ushers will be by your side. Please note, it will not work if this is disconnected. So connect it first and then it will work. Ushers are ready to serve us. Distinguished guests, we're also live on Twitter. Should you decide to tweet about what we're doing here today, please use the hashtag ALCIF2022 and ALCIF Lagos 2022. Allow me welcome for his welcome address, our chief host, if you let me call him so, a man who seems to live only for the expansion of local content within Nigeria and beyond our shores to the rest of Africa. He has shown that he's an advocate for the energy transition through the African lens and African context. He is known as the voice of African solutions to African challenges, and he's also called the champion of local content in Africa, and we mean every word of it. Please welcome the Executive Secretary at the Nigerian Content Development and Monitoring Board, Engineer Simbi KCA Wabute.
Thank you very much, Joyce, for that warm introduction. Let me start by recognizing the presence of the Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, Chief Timipri Silva, represented by my friend and brother, the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Petroleum Resources. Let me also recognize my friend who left his secretariat to be with us here today, the APO Secretary General, who is present here himself. I recall when we had this conversation in Bayelsa, he was also there. Farouk Ahmed, you're recognized and welcome. I also recognize the presence of the representative of the Afri-Exim Bank, which of course is one of those institutions that we are looking at seriously to cooperate with in terms of the import of this agenda. Let me also recognize the presence of all the council members of NCDMB. I can see Engineer Kashim Ali, I can see Mena Afuriokuma, and of course the chairman of PETAN, Nick Oduniwe. I can see them present here. I also recognize a board member of the NMPC, Mrs. Lami Ahmed. She's always been associating with NCDMB, and she's always dressed locally. You're welcome, Madam. I recognize the presence of the Pioneer Executive Secretary of NCDMB, Engineer N.S. Chu Wakpa. You will wonder why he's elegantly dressed today. because he was successful in a golf tournament yesterday. So he wanted to exhibit that prowess with his dressing. I recognize all the directors of NCDMB. I can see Patrick, I can see Isaac, and also Tunde Adelana, and also the GMs of NCDMB here present, and management of staff of that organization. Of course, my brother from Senegal, who is here. We have a meeting tomorrow to discuss local content on how we expand that in Senegal, and also my other brother at this extreme end. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, let me start first by thanking all our sponsors displayed behind me here. When we start doing business with them, people should not wonder why we are doing business and cooperating with these sponsors who have seen the light and also agree that this is the right thing to do. So we take special interest in them. They are pioneer sponsors of this event, and we will work with them. So tomorrow when you start seeing us cooperating and taking investment positions with them, please do not feel bad. It's because they decided that this is the right thing to do. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, especially gentlemen of the press and panelists that will be discussing here today, I welcome you to this event. I recall that we held the African Local Content Roundtable in Yenagoa, Bayelsa State, sometime last year, where we discussed some key points on how to move the African oil and gas industry forward. It was a very healthy discussion with all participating African counterparts, and the APO Secretary General was there. Therefore, this forum is a follow-up, as we agreed during that meeting, on discussion to close out one of the key actions points from the African Local Content Roundtable. Because in NCDMB, we do not just put people together to have a conversation. Out of every workshop or seminar that we organize, the takeaways from that seminar or workshop is taken seriously, and we follow through with them. Here, we will seek to kickstart the development of a framework for establishing a pool of funds for funding major oil and gas projects and attraction of investors into the country. Thus, we have invited subject matter experts in various aspects of finance, investment, international trade, energy dynamics, and other stakeholders, including some of our Project 100 beneficiaries, to come together and further deepen discussions on this subject and agree the way forward. My welcome address, therefore, is meant to provide the background on why we need to develop a robust response to the push for Africa to abandon her hydrocarbon resources, highlight some of the bright spots at the business, national, and continental levels to attract or deploy funding to the oil and gas industry. And lastly, to propose some ideas to enhance continental collaboration and global support for our natural resources. The African continent, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, is blessed with enormous human and capital resources. The continent is estimated to have a population of about 1.3 billion people, out of which a significant proportion of this number are youths. The continent is one that needs energy to fuel its developmental and economic activities. The African electricity requirement was estimated to be about 2 terawatts, out of which a paltry 162 gigawatts, or less than 10%, is generated. Over 640 million people, representing about half of the total population in Africa, have no access to electricity, while the other half, with access, have unreliable supply of electricity. And I think this point was further buttressed by the Secretary to Apple during the African Roundtable discussions and also during the recently concluded Nigerian International Energy Summit. The challenge of inadequate energy is partly the reason why Africa is faced today with poverty, conflicts, migration, brain drain, and lacks very low on Human Development Index. Ironically, the African continent is reputed to hold vast deposits of natural resources, including oil and gas. In the last 4 decades, the number of African countries producing oil has increased rapidly as new discoveries are made, with the latest additions being the countries of Mozambique, Senegal, Uganda, Namibia, Mauritania, and South Africa. In those days, when you take off the map of Africa, you could always see some bright spots in oil and gas. But today, the entire continent is red, as reflected here. It shows you how the natural resource itself is abundant in our dear continent. Therefore, the expectation is that the existing and new hydrocarbon discoveries would have presented additional opportunities to address the energy challenge in the African continent. But the narrative we are hearing from most of the developed countries in Europe and North America are quite disturbing and disheartening, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. The quest for energy transition, as it is being advocated in some European countries and other parts of the world, is now taking center stage. And as this trend progresses, the hydrocarbon resources in Africa are becoming endangered resources. Before, the discussion was endangered species. Now it is endangered resources, and if you extrapolate that, it's endangered continent. Whereas the addition of a new form of energy into the mix of options available for utilization by mankind has always followed the normal course of acceptance and adoption. This is the first time a group of nations, in the name of mankind, is setting deadline for adoption of one form of energy to the detriment of the other. This has never happened in the history of mankind. At the COP26, if you want to clap, clap. I have time to get it. At the COP26 event held in Glasgow in late 2021, these countries made commitments on behalf of the rest to curb methane emissions, align the finance sector with the net zero by 2050, ditch the internal combustion engine, accelerate the phase out of coal, and end international financing for fossil fuels. This is perhaps, to put it mildly, a declaration of war. Already, some European banks are pulling out of hydrocarbon development projects, and most of international operating companies are shying away from the investments in hydrocarbon projects to avoid backlash from green energy activists. This unfolding scenario is of huge concern to African leaders and policymakers in the oil and gas industry. It is therefore critical that we explore the necessary steps required to address this funding and investment challenge so that our hydrocarbon resources is not abandoned below the surface like many African countries, including Nigeria, abandoned coal mines in those days. It is of a bit of a comfort that some African countries have made some inroads in securing funding and investment for the development of hydrocarbon projects, with strategic partnerships with countries that have not turned themselves to oil and gas adversaries, such as China and India. Other African countries are also doing their bit to develop infrastructure and processing plants for the hydrocarbon value chain, but there is more to be done. One of such bright spots, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, is the 650,000 barrels per day Dangote refinery, which is now mechanically complete, as we were told. This investment represents a major statement of the emerging crop of bold and audacious African businessmen positioning themselves and the continent on the map of the required energy mix for mankind. The 2022 Forbes list of African billionaires listed 18 Africans as billionaires, many of whom I see as key businessmen that could leverage to provide the needed investment to develop our hydrocarbon resources. In respect of the African institution, one bright spot is the African Export-Import Bank, Afri-Exim Bank, a Pan-African multilateral financial institutions mandated to finance and promote intra and extra-African trade based in Cairo, Egypt. It is very instructive. The Afri-Exim Bank signed a $1.04 billion facility with the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation to finance the exploration of petroleum during the second intra-African trade fair, which held in Durban in South Africa, a few days after the completion of COP26 event in Glasgow. For a bank that disbursed more than $42 billion between 2016 and 2020 in support of African enterprises, there is no doubt that Afri-Exim Bank is an institution of note in consideration of the quest for funding hydrocarbon development projects in Africa. For the African Development Bank, AFDB, its objective is to spur sustainable economic development and social progress in member countries, thus contributing to poverty reduction. AFDB has the African Development Fund, which became operational in 1974 and has cumulatively invested $45 billion over its 44 years of operationalization on the African continent. Although the fund has not been used much in the hydrocarbon sector, there is an opportunity to engage AFDB to utilize part of the fund for oil and gas development, which could be of interest to its largely Western donor countries against the backdrop of disruption in gas supply in Europe. If you want to indeed eliminate poverty, you must provide access to energy. At country level, Nigeria represents a bright spot in the provision of funds that can be secured for the execution of oil and gas projects. The funds include the Nigerian Content Intervention Fund and other funds that can be sourced from development financial institutions like the Bank of Industry, Exim Bank, and other special funds that are managed by the central bank, to mention but a few. For instance, NCDMB partnered with the Bank of Industry to establish the $300 million Nigerian Content Intervention Fund. In addition, NCDMB partnered with Exim Bank to create a $50 million fund for working capital for women in energy. In the area of research and development, the board has sponsored the patent for some interventions, and we have commenced the process for commercializing those interventions. A $50 million research and development fund was also launched to enable research and development in the oil and gas industry. Beyond the provisions of this intervention fund as loans to industry players, the board has also entered into partnership with project promoters in the hydrocarbon sector. In respect of modular refinery, NCDMB is serving as catalyst for the development of 4 modular refineries with the 5,000 barrels Walter Smith Modular Refinery already in operation. Let me also highlight that the AFC played a role in seeing this project to its current state. The other three under construction are the 2,500 barrels DuPont Modular Refinery, the 2,000 barrels Atlantic Refinery, and the 12,000 barrels Ezekiel Hydroskimming Modular Refinery. Our partnership investment in the gas value chain, which span across development of LPG storage terminals and jetties, inland gas processing to produce LPG and propane, infrastructure for gas gathering and injection into gas pipeline networks, CNG facilities, and manufacturing of composite LPG cylinders. Specifically, these partnerships include the following: partnership with Nedo Gas Processing Company in Kwale Delta State for the establishment of 80 million scof of gas processing plant and a 300 million scof Kwale gas gathering hub. Partnership with Transel Gas Limited in Cocoa Delta State for the 5,000 metric tons LPG storage and loading terminal facility. Partnership with Brass Fertilizer for the development of a 10,000 metric tons per day methanol plant at Odiema in Brass in Bayelsa State. Partnership with Butane Energy in the rollout of LPG bottling plants and depots in Abuja and 10 northern states of Kano, Kaduna, Katsina, Bauchi, Nasarawa, Zamfara, Niger, Plateau, Gombe, and Jigawa states. The 123,000 metric tons per annum LPG production plant in Itorogu in Delta State. I would like to add that some of these provisions contained in the Petroleum Industry Act 2021 to the list of funding opportunities put in place by the Nigerian government to support the oil and gas industry. The PIA 2021 has created the Frontier Exploration Fund to be used for promoting the exploration of frontier basins while also developing exploration strategies and portfolio management for unassigned frontier basins in the country. The PIA also provides for the establishment of the Midstream and Downstream Gas Infrastructure Fund for the financing for government's participation or shareholders' interest in infrastructure related to midstream operations to unlock private investment and to enhance domestic consumption of natural gas in Nigeria. The fund will be mainly funded by the imposition of a 0.5% levy on wholesale price of petroleum products and natural gas sold in Nigeria. If that fund is adequately managed, it will be a game changer in terms of oil and gas infrastructure in Nigeria. There are also other provisions for the creation of well-funded trust for development activities in the oil-producing communities. In conclusion, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I wish to reiterate that there is genuine battle for the soul of hydrocarbon industry in Africa. We must all rally to save the industry, or we stand by while it perishes right in the front of our eyes. We need to build on the good initiatives already in place to increase the pool of funds available for hydrocarbon projects and also motivate credible investors to pique interest in the industry. There must be a means of aggregating the various funds being projected by development finance institutions, banks, and other agencies so that the big-ticket funding transactions can be carried out. While the activists are demonizing oil and gas industry, our message must be consistent to the effect that fossil fuel will not disappear or be transited or shifted out of the energy mix so soon. Fossil fuels have largely contributed to the development we are witnessing today globally, and we must not be castigated to extinction. The business model for the oil and gas industry in Africa must change to the one in which there are deliberate in-country value addition to reduce or eliminate reliance on crude exports. In closing, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, let me seize this opportunity to say a big thank you to the Honorable Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, Chief Timipri Silva, ably represented here by the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry, for providing the enabling environment and giving the right steers for the development agencies under his ministry to key into the various government agenda. Once again, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, let me thank the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, who is also the Minister of Petroleum Resources, for his continuous support for the agenda that we intend to pursue within NCDMB and encourage other African countries to come through. Once again, I welcome you all to the African Local Content Investment Forum, and I wish you all a fruitful deliberation as we proceed with the program. I look forward to a workable program of actions at the end of all deliberations. Thank you very much and welcome.
Ladies and gentlemen, another round of applause, please, for Engineer Simbi K.S.A. Wabote, Executive Secretary, Nigerian Content Development and Nigerian Content Development Monitoring Board. Ladies and gentlemen, again, this is, of course, being covered live on Arise TV, also on the social media channels for the NCDMB. One more word about our translation devices. Again, Channel 1 English, Channel 2 French, Channel 3 Portuguese. It's not going to work outside the hall, so it's only going to work in here. When we do want you to please leave them on your seats if you're going to be exiting the hall. All right, our next speaker, ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker, I watched him about a week or two ago, also on Arise TV, at an energy summit in Abuja, where he spoke passionately about the hydrocarbon industry in Africa. In fact, he almost pretty much threw a challenge to Western environmentalists, saying that they were trying to bully the African continent into exiting investment in hydrocarbons. So I'm very, very honored to call to our next speaker, Dr. Omar Farouk, who is the Secretary General of the African Petroleum Producers Association.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency, Chief Timipri Silva, Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, ably represented by my brother, Dr. Nasser Sanugorzo. Executive Secretary, Nigerian Content Development and Monitoring Board, my good friend, Simbi K.S.A. Wabote, Mr. Sadiku, Commissioner Mines and Energy of ECOWAS, Mr. Zakaria Doso, Managing Director, African Energy Investment Corporation, Chairman Petan Nyekodinui, Mr. Ernest Onwapa, Pioneer Chief Executive of the NCDMB, the man who laid the foundation for my brother to come and build on. The head of local content from potential APO member country, Senegal, Ibrahim Sanya, my good friend from AfriExim. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I believe I've done the protocol the way I should. I should like to thank the organizers of the African Local Content Investment Forum for the invitation to be part of this very important forum and for the foresight and proactiveness on the African agenda for the global energy transition. This forum, with the theme Evolving a Pan-African Strategy Towards Sustainable Funding of the African Oil and Gas Projects, could not have come at a better time. This is because Africa has just come to the full realization that the world, or more precisely, that part of the world that Africa has depended on for over 3/4 of a century for hydrocarbon energy technology, expertise, markets, and funding, has now resolved to abandon hydrocarbons and, by implication, the mainstay of the economies of many African oil and gas producing countries. It is important to note, to not delink the global paradigm shift away from fossil fuels to renewables from the failure of the doctrine of project independence, initiated by President Richard Nixon of the United States in 1973, aimed at ending US oil imports in response to the oil embargo placed on the US and some European countries by some Arab oil-producing countries in the aftermath of the Arab-Israeli conflict of 1973. The bitter experience of the United States from the oil embargo made it to resolve to wean itself first from foreign oil, particularly Arab oil. The United States government introduced policies aimed at achieving this objective, among which was support for the development of shale oil. For a number of reasons, these policies did not achieve the desired results. It was the failure to achieve that objective that led to a change in strategy. Having realized that shale cannot compete with conventional oil in the market, a deliberate strategy to demonize oil was hatched. First, funds were provided to research institutions to conduct studies on the impact of burning fossil fuels on the atmosphere and, by implication, on the health of the people living on this earth. These studies unearthed the dangers of greenhouse gas emissions on the atmosphere, and these findings were then given wide publicity, and lots of funds were devoted to the establishment of many NGOs whose mandate is to demonize hydrocarbons. It is interesting to note that these findings were not new. As far back as 1859, John Tyndall, an Irish physicist, had made similar findings. Savon Arrhenius, a Swiss scientist, had also published his findings on the same subject in the 1800s. But because it was not in the interest of the industrializing powers of the time, the United States and Europe, to stop the use of fossil fuels at that time, the findings of those studies were never publicized. And for nearly 200 years, but especially in the last 100 years, they continued to use fossil fuels to consolidate their economies. Now that their economies have graduated from reliance on intensive energy for production, and Africa is on the verge of industrialization, these countries have suddenly remembered that fossil fuels are harmful to mankind. It's obvious, therefore, that the energy transition agenda had been on the agenda of the advanced developed countries since the last quarter of the last century. But for whatever reason, we in Africa failed to see them. We went on behaving as if the end of oil shall never come. Ladies and gentlemen, if in the first half of the 20th century, Africa could say that it had no expertise, no markets, no technology, and no funds to take effective control of its God-endowed natural resources because oil was sold at an average of about $1 per barrel, and the Seven Sisters dictated what the owners of the resource received. Can we say the same thing after the Arab oil embargo of 1973, when the price of the barrel doubled, tripled, and even quadrupled? Can we say the same for the period between 2003 and 2008, when oil prices rose from about $20 per barrel to about $150 per barrel? When the price of oil began a steep rise, not due to market fundamentals, but to extraneous forces, including geopolitics and market manipulation, did it not occur to us that the sudden windfall could also trigger a reaction from the powerful countries on whom we have always depended for the exploitation of our resources? Yet, we continue to spend the windfall without making the necessary investments on the golden goose that lays the golden eggs. We did not make the required investments in the industry's research and development, not in technology. We did a bit in human capacity development, but not in the financing sector. Rather, we saw the windfall as a largesse to be shared for consumption. Today, African oil and gas producing countries have gotten so used to big expenditures, and since what they get is not enough to sustain that expenditure pattern, many of them have resorted to borrowing. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, energy transition is real. The advanced countries are determined to move away from energy that they do not control. It is a matter of national security and national interest. And for this, they are prepared to pay any price. They are closing their institutions that had for about a century become global centers of oil and gas technology research. They are ordering their financial institutions that had for decades funded the industry not to fund oil and gas projects anymore. They are investing heavily in alternative sources of energy. And all these are taking us by surprise because we've been caught napping. Is all hope lost? I do not think so. Africa can still rectify its mistakes. And I see the proactive initiative that the Nigerian Content Development and Monitoring Board, under the able leadership of Engineer Simbeke Siwabote, has been taking in the past 6 years or so, as directed at changing the predicament we have found ourselves in. In this respect, I would like to point out that a major study commissioned by the APO on the future of the oil and gas industry in Africa, which Mr. Engineer Simbi was a part of, has concluded that the oil and gas industry in Africa shall need a new development model in order to survive the energy transition. If it fails to re-strategize and come up with a new model, it risks losing the 125 billion proven crude oil reserves and the hundreds of trillions of proven gas reserves as stranded assets. The new model sees in greater cooperation and collaboration among African oil and gas producing countries the only way to survive the challenges posed to Africa by the energy transition agenda. Thus, while still encouraging the development of national local content as currently practiced, the model shall also seek to emphasize a continent-wide approach to addressing the funding challenge, the capacity development challenge, the lack of cross-border and regional and sub-regional infrastructure challenge, the technology deficit challenge, and the underdeveloped energy market challenge using the African Continental Free Trade Agreement as an enabling vehicle. It sees the potential of a huge energy market in empowering the 900 million people in Africa who have no access to any form of modern energy. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, lest we are misunderstood, Africa does not contest the science of climate change. We are not against any action that shall make the world a better place for all. What we are saying is that by prioritizing the growth of their national economies and the well-being of their peoples over the health of humankind in the 19th century, today's advanced countries, who are the main champions of climate actions and the greatest culprits of atmospheric emissions, have lost their moral right to tell others what their priorities should be in the energy transition agenda. It is high time Africa understood that its salvation lies in its own hands. We cannot continue to look outside for help to save ourselves. We cannot afford to discard what we have in abundance for what we do not have. We will not change from one form of dependence to another form of dependence. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, as I take a critical look at the target publics and institutions for raising the funds to finance energy projects in Africa in the absence of traditional suppliers, as identified by the organizers of this forum, I see that we are yet to fully appreciate the challenge facing our continent. For I see that our proposed solutions is more of the same, and more of the same will not change our situation. When the Americans were confronted with a similar challenge after the Arab oil embargo, they treated the challenge as a matter of national energy security, and their response was crafted accordingly. But what I see us doing is to propose to go to financial institutions to assist raise the funds for our survival. It will not work. None of the financial institutions operating in Africa today can afford to provide all the funds required for the oil and gas industry in Africa to operate and grow, and at the same time to meet their original mandate. It was in recognition of this fact that the Upper Fund for Technical Cooperation was restructured and given a new mandate under a new name, the Africa Energy Investment Corporation, ICOP. Its focus is to fund oil and gas projects as the traditional financiers withdraw from the industry. But we are realistic. ICOP cannot do it alone. No financial institution in Africa today can do it alone. But through cooperation and collaboration, we are confident that Africa shall succeed. If we see energy security as critical to our national security, we should enact laws that provide for a portion of windfalls from oil and gas sales to be reinvested in the industry. I can say, and I believe both Ernest Nwapa and Simba Kessie will agree with me, that your success in NCDMB is as much a function of your capacities as leaders and the support you got from your governments as the guaranteed source of income that you have gotten. Because the laws that establish NCDMB insulated you from relying on any government or anybody to give you money. There is in the law mandatory funds that should come to you, and all your success really can be related to that. African governments must learn to understand that unless they do something like this at the continental level, we are not getting anywhere. We need to find a way or ways of getting African oil and gas producing countries' governments to commit to a certain percentage of the windfalls, a special fund for the sustenance of the oil and gas industry during this period of transition. A guaranteed source of revenue is the only guarantee for the success of the new order we want to see in Africa. That revenue shall not come from the private sector alone, not because it does not make sense to make the investment, but because it's a matter of national security for the powers that be. In other words, I can guarantee you that today in America and Europe, there are many investors that would want to invest in the oil and gas industry because they know that for the next 15 to 20 years, it's going to give them a lot of money. But they can't because their governments will not allow them to do that. That being so, African governments have got to re-strategize and think out of the box. I cannot conclude these remarks without acknowledging the leadership role of Professor Benedict Oke-Orama, President and Chairman of the Board of Directors of AfriExim, and his team in Cairo, who are providing in the effort to salvage Africa from the impending calamity resulting from the withdrawal of foreign finances from the African oil and gas sector. All of us at the APO and ICOP appreciate your commitment and determination for us to pull our resources together for the common good. APO believes that the salvation of Africa lies in cooperation and collaboration, and we are prepared to work with institutions that share our concern for the development of our continent. In conclusion, let me once again express APO's appreciation to the government and good people of the Federal Republic of Nigeria for handing over the organization and conduct of the Africa Local Content Roundtable, which was initiated by Nigeria to APO. The APO Ministerial Council at its last meeting in December approved that the African Local Content Roundtable be held as a continental event. In view of the fact that the approval was received only last December, the first APO-organized Africa Local Content Roundtable shall be held as part of Cape 8, scheduled to take place in Luanda, Angola, between 16th and 19th May 2022. It's at that meeting that the modalities for the subsequent roundtables shall be adopted. We invite all APO member countries and operators to participate, to please attend that meeting so that together we can plan the way forward for our continent. Finally, I would like to once more express our appreciation to NCDMB for this excellent initiative, the Ministry of Petroleum Resources for its support, African financial institutions that are here to support this laudable initiative, and Heritage Times for organizing this event. I thank you for your kind attention.
Our thanks again to Dr. Omar Farouk. A round of applause for him, please. Secretary General of the African Petroleum Producers Association, APO. Next up, ladies and gentlemen, is of course the AfriExim Bank. They've made headlines all through the year, even last year, this year, with critical financing projects across the African continent. It's my pleasure next to call up Dr. Benedict Orama, MDC of the AfriExim Bank, ably represented by Mr. Ibrahim Sagna, who is the Director and Head, Advisory and Capital Markets at the AfriExim Bank. A round of applause, please.
Good morning. Good morning. Can you hear me well? All right. Your Excellencies, Mr. Timipre Silva, Ministry of State of Petroleum Resources, ably represented by Mr. Nasir here. Your Excellency, Mr. Wamkele Mene, Secretary General of African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat, heads of APO member countries, distinguished gentlemen, ladies, Captain of Oil and Gas Industry, I here bring you the warm greetings on behalf of President Benedict Orama, who's the chairman of our board of directors, who was not able to attend and wish he could be here. The bank is immensely honored to have been invited to participate at the second African Local Content Investment Forum and expresses its deep appreciation to the Federal Republic of Nigeria and the Nigerian Content and Monitoring Board, which is hosting this outstanding event. The bank would also like to take this opportunity to congratulate the APO for the phenomenal work they have been doing. We've been very humbled to be their partner. And the role that they continue to conduct, as you can see from the presentation that was just made by my good friend. Together, the industry and the players will need to define a sustainable long-term path, and we will be there to provide the funding alongside the financial partners. Afrexim Bank is cognizant of the impact of the global energy transition, and that impact, what it's currently having across investment philosophies with IOCs and also financial institutions. Noting Africa's large hydrocarbon resources base and the dependency of African economies on these resources for fiscal and forex revenues. The bank recognizes the need for a framework that enables continued investment in the continent oil and gas sector, while also working on ways to combat the climate change. Africa has over 125 billion barrels of proven crude oil reserves and hundreds of trillions of cubic feet of proven gas. And more findings are yet to be made in various regions of the continent. African countries are heavily dependent on foreign capital, technology, and expertise to explore and produce the oil and gas assets. The dependence of the industry on foreign factors poses a serious risk in terms of viability. And we need to really think about it and have some solutions. The oil and gas infrastructure in the continent requires continued, I repeat, continued investment to enable it to sustain the requirement of an industry that keeps on evolving. And such optimum technologies are required for efficient and sustainable management of the resources that we own. Africa is highly dependent on imported oil products at the same time. In fact, by 2035, the Middle East, North Africa, and the former Soviet Union are expected to supply most of the oil and gas demand for oil refined products. If concerted efforts are not made by African governments to revamp existing refineries, establish greenfield refineries for their own, this also poses another serious danger for energy security. And we are all watching TV these days between two neighbors. So energy security is something we need to really ponder on. Exporting natural resource generates a significant source of government revenue for sub-Saharan African countries, such that natural gas, crude oil, metals contribute on average approximately 25% of the region government revenues, 25%. That's across many African countries. Export of hydrocarbon fossil fuels comprised over 48.5% of sub-Saharan African export value between 1995 to 2018. The export structure has changed substantially over the last decade, with the value of the fossil fuel declining sharply and that of mineral energy climbing sevenfold since 1995. Given that nearly 50% of sub-Saharan African export value is composed of fossil fuel, the global energy transition may have profound effect in our economies. The United States, Canada, and 18 other countries committed at the recent COP26 climate summit to stop public financing for fossil fuels projects abroad by the end of 2022. There goes a deadline. And steer their spending into clean energy instead. Countries that signed the pledge together invested nearly 18 billion US dollars on average each year in international fossil fuel projects from 2016 to 2020. Several oil and gas projects in developing countries can be affected due to the reduced investments. While noting the adverse effects of climate change on environment, Africa's carbon emissions are impressively low, 4% to be precise, 4% of global climate emission. In the meantime, in the same residencies of 54 African countries, you have 17% of the global population. As you can see, there is a massive gap. Africa's fossil fuel are focused on developing infrastructure, providing more access to education, and building housing, industries, services. And like the developed countries of the West, African countries still need to rely on fossil fuel for growing and sustainable development. There is a need to continue financing oil and gas in the continent to avoid destabilizing African economies due to a sudden reduction from Western financial institutions. This unplanned shift for African countries is not welcome. There is also the issue of energy poverty. Our good friend reminded us that over 600 million people across the continent still live without access to modern energy. With energy demand in Africa expected to grow by 50% over the next 2 decades, there is genuine opportunity to leverage the continent's large hydrocarbon resources base to permanently address the issue. All these factors together facilitate the creation of a framework to attain long-term energy sustainability and sufficiency on the continent. For it to be successful and have the desired impact, the framework must transcend at all facets of the industry, upstream, midstream, downstream, while also leveraging the transition characteristic of natural gas. To have the desired impact, it is important that ultimately the funding platform be developed, and that platform developed must have strong technical capacity, operation, commercial, risk management, regulatory experience across the African energy value chain, complemented with broad international experience to enhance African energy agenda. Afreximbank has played a key role in the African oil and gas industry since its establishment. Just by a few figures, by the third quarter of 2020, our total outstanding loans was around $4 billion. By the third quarter of last year, that number had crossed $5 billion. And as you've heard, And as you've heard from the distinguished guest, over the last 4 months alone, we've completed $1 billion for NNPC. We've signed a $5 billion agreement with NNPC. We've signed an MOU of $5 billion with UTM to meet our distinguished friend, Mr. Julius Rone, and also the group BOI that was mentioned. We just organized a 700 million euro bond for them last week. And these are just to name a few, but our commitment to the sector is absolute. The bank upstream financing support has assisted also acquisition in oil mining licenses for a number of producing assets here in this country and overseas, for drilling and new wells to ramp up production and construction of surface production facilities here and overseas. The midstream financing support has also cut across construction of pipelines, storage facilities, marine assets, barges, tankers, you name it. In a bid to leverage the global financing into Africa, we have also led some of the largest syndication in the sector. In fact, the largest refinery in the world, which is the Dangote facility, which has been shown earlier today, we are today the largest lender in the globe on that facility, with well over $1 billion. We also are the leading syndication group for the continent, oil and gas being one of the key sectors. The bank remains keen to continue supporting the financing of economically viable oil and gas transactions across the continent, given the oil and gas account for a substantial portion of the bank's portfolio. There's a need to find a careful balance on how to continue financing projects in the sector sustainably. The bank does recognize the need to partner with African economies, national oil and gas companies, sovereign wealth fund, private sector, DFI, and other institutions to achieve this balance. And as you've heard from my good friend, Secretary of APO, we're working very closely with them in all of their efforts to make this a reality. Today's event provides a great opportunity to advance this conversation, and we are pleased to have been invited to participate. Afrexim Bank expresses its appreciation, gratitude to all of the oil and gas industry stakeholders working alongside APO and NCDMB to further develop the Africa oil and gas industry. The bank is committed to working alongside all stakeholders to explore the feasibility of the African Local Content Development Fund. We thank you sincerely and wish you all a productive and engaging session. Thank you very much.
Another applause for Mr. Ibrahim Sagna, Director and Head Advisory and Capital Markets at Afrexim Bank, speaking on behalf of the President of Afrexim Bank, Professor Benedict Orama, and reiterating their continuous support for the Africa oil and gas space with all that has come in already and will continue to come in for our development. Please appreciate the Afrexim Bank. Thank you, sir. Distinguished guests, it's my honor and privilege to welcome to the microphone our keynote speaker for today, who is a man responsible for thriving and sustained petroleum industry in Nigeria. He has also been an ambassador for the oil and gas industry across Africa. We are honored to have him here. He is the Honorable Minister of State, Petroleum Resources, Nigeria, Chief Timipri Silva, who is ably represented by the Permanent Secretary, Dr. Nasir Gwazo, MNI, NPOM. Please welcome him warmly.
Ladies and gentlemen, permit me to trace back my protocols to my principles. I will address them in absentia because of what they have done to the petroleum sector, to the energy sector. So I start with the President himself, President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, who happens to be the Minister of Petroleum Resources. And my very amiable Minister of State, Chief Silva Timipre, who is the Minister of State. The two of them have done for Nigeria what in history will be remembered for long. The PIB had been in gestation for over 20 years. They brought it to life. The decade of gas was declared by the minister, and the stare they are given, I'm sure when they leave, history will judge them positively. So now I come back to the hall. Dr. Omar Farouk, Secretary of the African Petroleum Producers Association, Engineer Simbi Kesie Wabote, Executive Secretary of the Nigerian Content Development and Monitoring Board. The first institution I visited since I came as permanent secretary was the NCDMB. And what I saw, I was really amazed that Nigeria could have this kind of institutions. And out of modesty and honesty, when I was praising him, he made a statement. He said, "Are you the pioneer?" Yes. He said, "No." I took over and he gave me the number of years. So today I also have the honor of seeing the pioneer ES of NCDMB, and that is Chief Ernest Nwaka. Simbi had told me about you. Today I'm seeing you live. Dr. Benedict Orama, MD, CEO of Afrexim Bank, ably represented by our son of the soil, Ibrahim Sanga. Ibrahim Sanga is a Senegalese Nigerian. You are most welcome, Ibrahim Sanga. Dr. Sadiko Duka, Commissioner in charge of Energy and Mines of ECOWAS, our neighbor also. You're welcome. Mr. Mo Ndiaye Mbaye, the Technical Secretary of the National Local Content Committee in Senegal. You're welcome. Zakaria Doso, Director General, African Energy Investment Corporation. You're welcome. Nicholas C. Oduniwe, the Chairman of PETAN. You're welcome. Of course, my sister and colleague on the NNPC board, Lami Ahmed, a very local content-friendly person. You're welcome. Board members of NCDMB, all directors of NCDMB, management and staff, delegates, speakers, gentlemen of the press, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you hear me say "I," just consider Timipre Silva speaking. I'm only representing him. But I like wearing his hat because he's the only person in Nigeria that when he's representing the president, he wears 3 caps. Every other person wears 2. He wears the cap of the president, he wears the cap of the minister, and he wears the cap of the Minister of State. So now I'm wearing 4 caps. He says, on the 3rd of June, 2021, I have the privilege to declare open the maiden edition of the African Local Content Roundtable, ALCR, in Yenagoa, Bayelsa, to set the agenda for a Pan-African approach to hydrocarbon development that is driven by in-continent value creation. In my concluding remarks, I charge the conveners of the roundtable, that is the NCDMB and APO, to ensure that there is a follow-up to actualize the key insights and recommendations from the roundtable. It is therefore a great pleasure today that in less than 1 year, we are here to discuss major outcomes from the Africa Local Content Roundtable. You deserve a round of applause. It is centered around sustainable funding of the African oil and gas industry. The theme of this forum, evolving a Pan-African strategy towards sustainable funding of Africa oil and gas projects, is apt, as it demonstrates our commitment to a community, as a community, to redefine and open up new frontiers for funding hydrocarbon development for the economic growth, job creation, technology development, and energy security. I'm therefore very pleased to hear that the Afrexim Bank has been engaged, and the bank has already conveyed its full commitment to the objectives of the forum, as evidenced by their presence here and all the projects enumerated by the representative of the bank. Without doubt, the emerging trend where leading multinational financial institutions are factoring environmental, social, and corporate governance issues in their lending decisions, and the seeming freezing of equity investment in upstream field development projects by international oil companies is a wake-up call for Africa to provide alternative funding, and I stress alternative funding, to sustain hydrocarbon development and secure our energy future. In December 2021, the Council of Ministers of Africa, of the Africa Oil Producing Countries Association, organization, they met and approved the implementation of the outcome of a study conducted on the future of oil and gas industry in Africa in the light of the energy transition. And by the way, it is good that African ministers met to deliberate on a study done. It's not just to come up with ideas. There was science behind it. There was a study to guide their decisions. And what are the contents of those findings? 1, Africa has over 120 billion barrels of proven crude oil and about 600 trillion cubic feet of proven gas reserves. 2, governments of APO member countries are heavily dependent on oil and gas revenues to meet their socio-economic obligations. This is a reality. 3, for Africa to attain energy security and in-continent value addition, it must address the following limitations. A, dearth of funds to finance its oil and gas sector projects, limitations in technology, and I want to emphasize this word limitation in technology mastery, because even with the commitment, the mobilization of resources, a huge threat to the sector will continue to be the absence of appropriate technology. As they withdraw their funding, the technology will also either disappear or deliberately disappear or die a natural death. And therefore, Africa will be on its own. So I really want to emphasize this technology. High-end skills gap, inadequate energy infrastructure to sustain oil and gas industry operations, underdeveloped internal market for hydrocarbon derivatives, and overdependence on the sale of crude oil for foreign exchange and budget financing. All these are serious threats to Africa's oil sector. Africa's energy transition should be anchored on maximizing fossil fuels, especially gas utilization and investment in renewable energy projects. With over 600 million people living without access to modern energy, Africa's energy demand in 2035 will be 40% higher than it is today, compared to 10% higher for global energy demand. This growth will be driven by industrialization, population, and expansion in economic activities. The above realities make this forum very compelling to design strategies for closing the gaps, propel sustainable growth, and optimize utilization of African goods and services across major global markets. That is why when I entered this room today, I was asking the organizers, where is AFTA? AFTA is conspicuously absent in this meeting. African Free Trade Continental Agreement area. They should be part of us. I hope they can be involved as soon as possible. Distinguished guests, let me further elaborate on the reason why funding is very important to Africa. A holistic look of the continent's oil and gas infrastructure requirements include upstream field development projects, pipelines, depots, terminals, refineries, petrochemical plants, and oil and gas research and development, and training institutions, all of which require huge funding. Countries that have promoted regional development projects have been constrained by funding. Examples include the West African Gas Pipeline, WACPA, the first transnational gas pipeline in the West African sub-region, with the potential of creating 80,000 jobs and reducing greenhouse emissions by approximately 100 million tons. The Trans-Sahara Gas Pipeline, TSGP, is another project that, if well funded, will serve as a corridor for the movement of natural gas through Algeria to EU member countries. The local content program for Africa can only be impactful in our various economies if there is a pipeline of projects that will sustain the utilization of capacities and capabilities developed or that are being developed in the industry. The Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement and its growth aspirations can only be actualized if we have a very vibrant oil and gas sector in view of the oil industry's capacity to harness resources from other sectors. Africa has abundance of renewable energy sources, including sunlight, water, wind, and biomass. However, the technology needed to convert these sources requiring huge funding if we are to avoid dependence on foreign technology. The foregoing provides the imperative for our active contribution to the technical sessions outlined in this forum so that we can come up with actionable recommendations for national and regional policy makers to implement. One good example is our policy direction as a nation. We have the petroleum sector under the Ministry of Petroleum. Where is the emphasis for renewable energy? Most countries now are moving out of that arrangement to have ministries of petroleum and renewable energy and petroleum resources, so that you channel the resources towards future energy plans. Finally, I earnestly hope that the final document of the Pan-African Strategy towards Sustainable Funding of Africa oil and gas projects would contribute towards increased regional collaboration and development of Africa's hydrocarbon industry. I thank you for honoring our invitation. I thank you for organizing this very important forum. And on behalf of my amiable Minister of State, who wears 3 caps and I am wearing 4, I wish you all an enjoyable stay in Lagos, and hereby on his behalf declare this forum officially open. Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, fireworks. A round of applause, please, for Mr. Dr. Nasser Guarzo, MNI, NPO, and Permanent Secretary, Minister of State for Petroleum Resources. Thank you so much again, sir. Very pertinent comments on gas investments, considering what's happening around the world. Next up, ladies and gentlemen, goodwill messages from our special guests and also our platinum sponsors. I want to call up to the stage Ross Oluyede, MD of the Managing Director of the Infrastructure Bank. Okay, and we'll go right next into our sponsors. And before our goodwill messages from our sponsors, I do want to recognize our full list of sponsors. Our platinum sponsors, Century Group, of course represented by Mr. Ken Etete, who is the MD and the CEO, and UTM Offshore Limited, represented who's here by Mr. Julius Rone, Managing Director. A round of applause. Our gold sponsors, Frigate Upstream Limited, Platinum Petroleum, Coleman Wires and Cables. Thank you so much. You can recognize our gold sponsors as well. And then our silver sponsors, Almina Resources Limited, Mosilo Group, Dorman Long Engineering Limited, Nexim, that's the Nigerian Export-Import Bank, Walter Smith Petroleum Oil Limited, and Stanbic IBTC Bank. Thank you so much, our silver sponsors. Thanks to all our sponsors. All right, so as far as the goodwill messages are concerned from our sponsors, I first want to call up from UTM Limited, UTM Offshore Limited, Mr. Julius Rune, Managing Director. You can come up for a goodwill message. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I stand on existing protocol. The Executive Secretary, Nigeria Content Board, I brought in good wishes from the management and staff from UTM Offshore to the participants for the second edition of the Funding Strategy for Africa Development. We at UTM see this as opportunity to showcase African potential to the world. The world is moving away from fossil fuel to cleaner energy. We believe Africa has to initiate our own development strategy in terms of financing and deliver the development of our given resources. UTM Offshore is pioneering the first floating FLNG in Nigeria, and with the support of Afrexim Bank, we've been able to aggregate our funding strategy, attending various international banking strategy with financing institutions to raise a single capital of over $5 billion for the two-phase project. First phase of $2 billion. As we speak today, we've been issued a license to establish sometime in February last year. We've developed the pre-FEED study for the first floating FLNG. Hopefully, by the grace of God, sometime in April, we'll sign the FEED, and we expect to commence construction next year. As a strategy to develop the Nigerian gas resources, we believe that the floating FLNG is a technology that will meet the gas at its location. We have a lot of stranded gas in Nigeria. Like you're aware, Nigeria is more of a gas nation than oil. With this initiative currently being discussed today, with all the participants, the financial institution, by the special grace of God, if we're able to develop an Africa Energy Bank that will create more development opportunity for companies from Africa to access funding to develop greater projects that will be of immense benefit to the continent. On behalf of the management and staff of UTM, I welcome everybody to this event. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Julius Rone, MD, UTM Offshore Limited. Next up, from the Century Group, Managing Director and CEO, Mr. Ken Etete, another one of our platinum sponsors. Goodwill message for him as well. All right, here he comes. Here he comes right now. All right. Round of applause for Mr. Ken Etete, MD, CEO, Century Group. You're welcome, sir.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'll stand on the existing protocols because we don't have a lot of time. Time is very important for people here. Century Energy Services, Century Group, Gas Plus, which I represent, is very pleased to be here. We've been part of local content. We're embodiment of local content. So we stand to support anything that is local content. Before local content became law, the pioneer of local content, N.S. Wapa, we worked very closely with him, of course, before then, always emphasizing on the importance of local content. And that became a law, so we're very happy about that. Of course, my older brother, Engineer Simbi Wabote, has been champion of local content across the world. He's supported local content. So it was very natural, and we're fortunate that the transition happened the way it happened, because both of them, one in the national scene, fighting to see that this law came to life. And I've also watched what Afrexim has consistently done to see that the African continent can stand on its own, because they fear the anxieties. And if you follow my blogs, I've also written about some of the anxieties are not necessary about the energy transition. And this has been further confirmed by all the speakers. And today, we talk about money. We talk about alternative funding strategies, finding money internally. But bigger than that is what the NCDMD is doing, which is building capacity locally. Because if we find all the money, and the people who execute these projects are not Africans, are not Nigerians, it means nothing, because all of that money just go back out of the continent, and all the resources go back out of the continent. So it means nothing. So what the NCDMD is doing is really combining all the critical elements, and that is where we stand on. As you know, Century is the first company, Nigerian company, to own our own FPSOs. Before then, it seems like it's impossible. And thank you very much. In 2009, we challenged one of the #1 FPSO operators in this country when NNPC was being literally forced to take on costs that was too much. And we said to NNPC, we're going to challenge them, we're going to take it out of them, and we'll do it at 40% their cost. And they thought it was impossible. We did it, and we took the Mistras FPSO out of an international operator and operated it on behalf of NNPC. And today it's 100% run by NNPC. And we've inspired a lot of other Nigerian companies to do the same. And for that, we give a lot of credit to what NNPC and the local content authorities have been doing. And for financing, I am very proud to say that we found all our money locally. And today, I'd like to give credit to some of the Nigerian banks, apart from Afrexim. We are also proud of all the support we've been getting from banks like Heritage, Keystone Bank, Access Bank, of course, is leading in this effort to see that local companies can have the resource they need, and they need more money to support us, to see that we support the vision and make Africans have the capacity. Last year, as you all know, we worked very closely with the Nigerian LNG to see that we do not just export LNG out of the continent and out of Nigeria, but bring LNG back in country, and we have put that on course to see that all off-grid people can have access to gas so that we can have cheap energy. So thank you very much. This is a must-be forum, and everybody must support this. We will be partners with our brothers on this for the longest time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, the very passionate Mr. Ken Etete from the Century Group. He is our CE. Please appreciate him once again. Distinguished guests, we have 3 major sessions today, and I would like to let us know that in the 3rd session, thankfully, the concern of our Honorable Minister, the head of African Continental Free Trade Area, will be speaking in that session. Jumping into the first, which is creating an enabling hydrocarbon development, financing framework for exploration and reserves expansion in Africa, the opportunities and the strategy. Leading this conversation as moderator is the Invest and Trade Africa show host, Uju Palsy. Please welcome her as she comes up. Just to remind us, as some of us are already tweeting, please tweet at official NCDMB and use our hashtags ALCIF 2022 and ALCIF Lagos 2022. Madam Moderator, ma'am, may I hand over to you now? The sound okay? All right. Welcome, ma'am.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this very remarkable session. As we all know, finance is at the heart of hydrocarbon developments in Africa as the climate change bill is bringing her. So without much further ado, kindly join me in welcoming my panelists, who are impressive personalities and represent well-informed organizations who will be giving us guidelines. So leading the panel will be Mr. Ibrahim Sagna. Kindly give him a round of applause as he comes forward. Mr. Ibrahim Sagna is the Director and Head, Advisory and Capital Markets in Afrexim Bank. And also on the panel is Mr. Zakaria Doso. Give him a round of applause. He is the Director General, Car Energy Investment Corporation. And we have also on the panel Mr. Mon Mbaye, the Technical Secretary of the National Local Content Committee from Senegal. Please give them a round of applause. And last but not least, we have Mr. Julius Rone, the CEO of UTM Offshore Limited. Another round of applause for him, please. So let's set this ball rolling. My dear panelists, from your own and institutional perspectives, kindly give us what a hydrocarbon finance framework should look like for Africa. So I'll be starting with you, Mr. Ibrahim Sagna. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay. I think, as I indicated earlier today, we feel that hydrocarbon is critical for the continent, and we need to realize that the energy mix that the continent commands has not changed drastically over the years. It still is dominated by oil and gas. And the new energies that are recommended by the West need to be explored, but they still collectively, if you exclude hydro and gas, it still constitutes less than 16% of our energy mix. And that includes wind, solar, and so forth. And the growth in terms of energy need is really massive. So our view is that hydrocarbon needs to stay front and center.
Amazing. Okay, so over to you, Mr. Zachary. We'd like to hear your thoughts on this.
Okay, thank you so much, Madam the Midwater. Thank you so much, honorable guest. You know, hydrocarbon sector in Africa has been for decades dependent on funding for outside Africa. And this is a very, very big challenge for us because, you know, in the world, those who have the funding are those who control you. And in this era now, where this international funding is going away, Africa, as countries, should work together now to pool their effort and resources together so that they can overtake this situation and have the independence in terms of funding of this sector of hydrocarbon and energy in general, which is a very strategic sector for our countries. We stop on that and we continue the debate.
All right, Mr. Mbaye, we'll look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Uju. I think that the problem of finance in the hydrocarbon sector is very, very important to address for us. We cannot continue the strategy consisting in relying essentially on external funding implemented until now, because this strategy has finished showing its objective limits. We have to build our own strategy and to address our financial local market to find funds necessary to finance our development, the development of these resources, which are very, very important for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rana.
Thank you very much, Uju. First and foremost, I would like to thank the NCDMB once more for putting this wonderful event on the financing strategy for Africa development. I would like to speak from experience. Irrespective of what the world is saying today of energy transition, there's still a huge appetite for fossil fuel development transaction out there in the world. We've been traveling with Afreximbank to meet various investors in the world, and I can tell you that Africa sits in a strategic position in terms of geography to Europe. And for that singular reason, with what is happening within two neighbors, the world is having a rethink on how to get energy across to the development country. So for us, we believe this is a time for Africa to seize the opportunity to develop our hydrocarbon with the resources and the finances that is still open for us to tap in the world. And if we tap those resources and develop Africa, we can be independent in terms of development and also create our own strategic structure of financing, which will form our reliance on further development on projects in Africa. So I see this as a situation the world is in a race. They're trying to move out of fossil fuel, but there are still funds out there that wants to invest in Africa that believe that gas is a transition fuel to a cleaner energy. As long as the world is interested in gas projects, they are still very, very much looking for projects that are bankable. So we believe that Africa as a continent should seize the last minute opportunities that we have to tap this resources funding for our project. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please kindly give my panelists a round of applause. Mr. Sagna, so in essence, is that we've been discussing, regional financing as the climate change bell is ringing. Is that going to be sustainable? Are we going to only be looking at regional financing? Will that be sustainable for hydrocarbon developments in Africa?
Thank you, Uju. I think that's a very salient question. And as you know, you have a good friend here for the Africa Energy Bank and Apple, who are pushing such a prominent venture. Because the continent, if you look at our history, we have had these regional blocks that have tried to solve some problems, whether it's ECOWAS and then SADC. Now we have the Africa Continental Free Trade. I think the same way the continent has gone from local, regional to continental, we need to approach hydrocarbon that way. It needs to be a continental solution. The one other thing I will add to it is we need to understand that as a continent, we need to embrace the notion of integrity. So integrity by definition is what you think and what you say and what you feel are identical. You need to be really in tune with your reality. So the energy transition theme is one that is a global reality and most importantly, a big Western problem. So to rush to embrace to solve someone else's problem when you have not solved your own, you have an absolute integrity problem. And we need to be cognizant of it.
All right. So still with you, Mr. Sagna, the Afrexim Bank is very much in support of hydrocarbon development in Africa. And we hear that steps are being taken internally to give structure to its financing. So kindly tell us what the bank is doing and what the steps are in regards to this.
So as I said earlier, our exposure and our work in the oil and gas territory is just massive. So we're really collaborating with our friends at Apple and other institutions to take this to light. Ideally, before the end of this year, if all goes well. We're really working closely with the authorities and seeking to formalize something that can go within the continental agenda. We believe that the continental agenda is to pursue fossil fuel while attending to the new development within renewable energy. So that agenda will crystallize without giving too much detail before end of this year. What we can promise is that in true form of our tradition, we will aim to deliver.
Fantastic. So, okay, over to you, Mr. Zakaria Doso. You are the Director General of the Africa Investment Corporation. Kindly give us insights into the organization and its role it serves in financing hydrocarbon developments in Africa.
Okay, thank you so much, Madam. Africa Energy Investment Corporation has been established by APO, African Petroleum Producers Organization, in 2019 during an extraordinary meeting of the Council of Ministers. It was in Abuja, the 26th of January, to give you more detail. And it has been established from the reform of APO Fund for Technical Cooperation, which used to be a small financial institution owned by APO, but for internal studies and projects of APO. The ministers of APO noticed that this context of energy transition and this dependence, as I mentioned earlier, on foreign funding is very critical for our industry. So we should do something to get our independence and build our own financial capability so that we cannot have some issue when the European Western countries withdraw their funding. And to start, they gave it authorized capital of 1 billion. We know that this sector is very, very capital intensive. So this is a start, and we are currently in the equity fundraising. And fortunately, as my good friend Ibrahim said, we are working closely with them to raise up to $1 billion, and we are hoping getting this fund by the end of this year so that we can fully start operation, funding this sector, and somehow get our independence also.
Thank you very much. So I'll come over to you, Mr. Rane. Your company, UTM Limited, is the first local content in Africa to get the licensing of a floating, processing, and storage liquefied natural gas vessel. Give us an insight of what the financial framework for this colossal task is.
Thank you very much. Like you said, this is the first indigenous company in Africa that is taking up on these challenges to build the first floating FLNG. It's a huge capital-intensive project, and you cannot secure that kind of funding in country. What we've done, we've prepared a project feasibility study and the bankability of the project. Once you get those right, then you approach the investors. But for you to approach investors in Europe and America and Asia, you need a gateway. That is the reason why we have an Afrasian bank in the midst. Afrasian Bank has a mandate on behalf of UTM to raise equity and debt for the project. As we speak today, we have the best in the world indicating interest to be part of this project in terms of equity and debt. And when I said earlier that there's still huge opportunity for funding in Africa, I was saying it from the point of practical experience in our interaction with investors in Europe. We just had NMPC Afrasian Bank Investment Forum in London. At that summit, the investors that gathered in the venue for the discussion, they were all interested to fund projects in Africa, irrespective of the energy transition that is ongoing. So for us in UTM, I believe that the Nigerian government has created the enabling environment for investors. The world is moving out of fossil fuel, but there's an energy transition, which is the gas. So we've gone out, we've put our project before the world, we receive expression of interest, we receive beyond our imagination the level of funding commitment to this project. And that's the reason Afreximbank went further to say, can we aggregate excess investors into a phase 2 of the project? So as we speak today, hopefully by the grace of God, we are pursuing our program aggressively to take an FID end of this quarter, first quarter next year to commence construction. We believe that the appetite for gas development and funding is still there in the international community. Because of the huge capital investment, it's difficult to raise this kind of money in Africa. And so therefore, the reason why this conference is quite interesting is to put Africa together to look at how we start thinking of inward development and have a way to showcase our potential, leading the charge by an indigenous company. And that's what UTM is doing on behalf of Africa to the world. Thank you.
Amazing. So over to you, Mr. Mbaye. Senegal local content is a new kid on the block. Tell us what you hope to achieve in local content in Senegal.
Yeah, thank you. As you said, we are new in the sector. We are knocking on the door of Apple. I hope that we will be welcome soon. In local content activities in Senegal, we have already realized some interesting things. One is we achieve to set up all the framework, legal framework of local content. Also, the institutional framework also is already done. We start the work and we try for especially financing, we try to set up a fund which will be support local content activities. As you know, we have to do several things in training peoples, in supporting our local companies, in order to upgrade them, to make them able to play in the sector, which have strict standard to reach. And we are working in all that things. And in financial aspect, as I said, we will use our fund once it will be abundant. We will use it to finance the activities in local content sector.
Fantastic. So we wish you the very best and we hope to see Senegal flying soon. Thank you. So over to you, Mr. Sagna. We've been now discussing regional financing. How will we deal with polarization of funding member countries? Do you think that will arise, or how do we create an equilibrium to handle stable financing across Africa?
Thank you, Riju. I think it's our good friend, Mr. Farouk, that pointed it out this morning when he was discussing Apple and their view on energy. I think somehow African nations need to make this a priority. The same way you heard the steps that were taken to get a local content law. Basically, it is a law. So there is a certain amount of money that goes into this effort without any consultation. So there is a need to actually look at the continent and realize that historically there are institutions that are national oil companies. There are countries that have excess reserve. There are also some fluctuations that are arising, even in the price of oil. So I think some of the ideas that are being contemplated with APO and others is find a way to make sure that continentally wise, the same way you have pension funds, you also have oil companies. So those institutions, in many ways, need to command some sort of destiny for all. There's enough capital on the continent. Obviously, these projects are capital extensive, but if you look at the savings of our nations through their pension fund and other institutions, those numbers are massive. They're just beyond massive. You look at the numbers that PENCOM represent today and what they used to represent 20 years ago or 15 years ago. It's a dramatic shift. In the meantime, most of the capital of those countries via various savings tend to not necessarily attend to this issue. So there has to be some sort of solution to push everybody centrally behind an institution like APO or a leading coordinator. And I think APO has that force of congregation to basically push concentration of capital, almost like a levy. And that basically sits for the purpose of base financing, and then you go to the foreigner. It doesn't make sense to go to the foreigner and say, Oga, please help solve my problem. In the meantime, he's looking at you, expensive suit, expensive watch, but you're not solving the problem. So we need to also put our base equity, our base contribution. Because the other thing also, President Orama tells us, and we remind everybody we speak to, is that the problems you have on the continent, they're rarely by accident. We are a legacy of colonization. So solving these problems is not going to be without intent. So for these things, they're not going to accidentally get solved unless we force some laws, some rules, some framework where, irrespective of the change of government, we can make that change. So from that standpoint, it's important to constitute something continental via a law or regulation, but that forces some sort of a levy.
Thank you very much. Yes, clap. So, Mr. Zakaria, the value chain across the hydrocarbon industry is quite some process. Kindly give us a funding focus in order of priority. What should we be looking at first?
Yes, the value chain of hydrocarbon is very complex. But our mission is to mobilize funding for the development of all the industry. The production, exploration production in our sector in Africa is mainly owned by international oil company. I cannot call that as development. So that means we have also something to do there. But the most important thing should be also in terms of value added. The speakers mentioned there, almost all, a majority of our crude oil is exporting outside Africa. And this is a very, very great challenge. That means we have to do something to add value on this or crude oil. That means we have to think about a refinery to get on our ground refined products, even go beyond with petrochemical also. I think doing so we can have a very great step in terms of local content, because who says building hydrocarbon as Dangote is doing, for example, means creating value, creating jobs, also improving expertising among we African also. And financiers should think about it and promote projects in terms of refinery. We should also think about transportation. One of the speakers said also Nigeria is more gas producer. So we have, as we say every time, more than 600 million people living outside access to electricity. Gas to power can be used for that. Funding is very needed for this sector also. So we need pipeline for gas, go where it is needed to have electricity producing from gas also. And that means also some storage capacity also. So those are some sectors I think we should put priority over to develop this critical sector for our economy.
Thank you very much. So you say value addition, transportation, and storage. The leaders are here, and I hope that they would put that into deep consideration. So over to you, Mr. Rane. Gas is a delicate resource, and it has been labeled Africa's energy transition fuel. How do you think Africa is poised in handling this resource?
Thank you very much. Like you just mentioned, gas is a transition fuel. I believe that this is the time for Africa to develop our gas resources, because there is still opportunity, there's still window before the West completely migrate out of fossil fuel. Since we have gas in the middle to mitigate and to take care of our losses from crude oil production, Africa should concentrate more to develop our gas resources. In Nigeria alone, we have over trillions of gas that is underdeveloped. So if Nigeria develop our gas resources, Nigeria is the leading production country in Africa in terms of oil and gas. The other African countries are queuing behind our steps. So Nigeria has declared gas, a decade of gas this period, to fast track the gas development in Nigeria. And I believe other African countries are watching the leadership role that Nigeria is playing in the gas sector. You agree with me that if we develop the gas in-country requirements alone, Nigeria is importing LPG, and we have natural gas that we can liquefy to support domestic requirements. So for us at UTM, what we see first in our project, the LPG that we're going to produce, which is over 200,000 metric tons per annum, we'll use that to support the domestic requirement for Nigeria. We said to our investors, they've agreed with us that Nigeria is one of the leading countries that import LPG into this country. And all our off-takers have agreed that this product, the propane, the LPG, will be sold in country to support the requirement and support government initiative to make Nigeria an independent transit for petrol, kerosene, and using the other ways to use gas to support power, to use gas to support domestic requirement in terms of we are today importing too many gas into this country. Once we have the LPG supported by the Nigeria LNG and all the other gas projects that is coming up in the country, Nigeria will lead the charge, and other African countries will see that as an avenue to develop their gas resources. Mozambique just deployed their first floating FLNG. As we're speaking today, by next month, their first cargo will be shipped of LPG and LNG out for export. This was done for an asset that is offshore stranded gas, just like what we have in Nigeria. So the technology that is currently being used to assess this stranded gas, and I believe that with the support of Nigerian government and all the regulatory authorities like NCDMB, Upstream Commission, definitely Nigeria will develop our gas potential
which by extension will rub off on all the other African continents who are looking forward to Nigerian leadership in the oil and gas industry. Thank you.
Amazing. So with that being said, Mr. Mbaye, Nigerian local content has been over a decade now and has built capacity over time. What are the opportunities for them in Senegal?
Well, as I said, we are starting, and thus we intend to learn the best practices here and in other countries. We are setting up everything in order to make local content a reality in Senegal. Our main goal is, main objective is to reach 50% of local content by 2030. And everything is now done in order to reach this objective. As I said, in this process, it is very, very important to address the question of finance. Financing these activities is very, very important, and it needs a lot of money each investment. But in our contract model, CRPP, all the investment must be done by companies, petrol companies, and the strategy in the local content is to try to make our local companies big player in these activities.
Thank you. So in that case, what we'll be exporting to Senegal regionally would be knowledge, right?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Mr. Sagna, we'll be closing this session. So in all said, do you think the Afrexim Bank is leading or taking a lead in developing a finance framework for funding hydrocarbon in Africa?
Thank you, Adrian. I think we are raising our hand whenever we are given a chance. So we'll be happy to do that alongside APO, all the members for NBCC, and that's a chance we welcome and will continue to do. I think the one thing I will observe and will invite the audience to observe is that if you look at the panel, you have a son of the soil, it's Mr. Rone, that has decided to take on this vast and colossal journey on his own shoulders, where typically you would have seen, a foreign Oyibo company coming to drive this. But he's taken it on his own. He could have decided to continue to consume his trading income and live his peaceful life, have 20 houses in London, in different places of the world, but he decided to bring his economic strength, intellectual expertise, and knowledge to the home country. The same way you have Apple that has decided that this was important. He decided to put together an institution to attend to energy. So this is something, we have lots of problems, but we need to recognize that slowly we are heading towards the right direction. Because for many, many years after independence, most of our countries have solely focused on continuing to do what was done, although they were independent. The infrastructure that you see in most African countries, whether it's oil and gas, whether it's other industries, was constructed by the former colonizer. Go to some countries, not much has been added since. And as a consequence, the trade happens only with the former master, which is a symptomatic of not realizing that you're free. So I think it's very important that we all start claiming our freedoms with actions. There's going to be countries that are still not aware that they are free, but until you dictate your agenda, you're agenda-less. And Africa needs to become quickly less agenda-less.
Thank you. The message was clear. So I want to thank you again, my dear panelists. And we want the audience to bear in mind that this is not just another talk session. We really hope that these discussions begin to set the frameworks that Africa needs to develop its hydrocarbon, especially at this time. We need to come out fast, we need to come out strong, and show the world that we really can do this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Uju Paulson there, our moderator for this session on the creating and enabling hydrocarbon development financing framework for exploration and reserves expansion in Africa. We do want a panel, a picture with our panelists, please. A picture with our panelists. Yes. Yes, sir.
Yes. Please.
Excellent. And one more picture, actually. We actually do want, engineer, we actually do want you to stay behind, as well as Dr. Farouk, sir, you as well, and Mr. Siasa of the facility. We actually want to take one more picture. And Mr. Sagna, you as well. So one more time. Yes.
So we're fine.
You're fine, sir. Thank you.
Somebody come with the dog. I think that I am in love.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, gentlemen. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to actually take a tea break for about a half hour. So do come back in about 30 minutes, and then we'll commence the second panel session. So we're going to take a tea break right now. Refreshments are right outside the hall. Remember to please keep your translator devices on your seats because they don't work outside. Take a tea break for half an hour, and then we'll continue with the next session.
Hallelujah, no one to die. Boss my shit, no me yara duba. I'm a rip, yeah, spinning me crocodile. They are, go slow, happy now. When I die, now you go green, let go. Somebody call me the doctor. I'd sing that I am in love. She know they are, now, when I do that, I go free. She shutting me up, she giving me styles, different styles, she be my papa. She doing her eye, she making a sound, she casting a spell, bra bra bra.
I feel like I have been just I'm intoxicated. What a good vibe, but she turned me bad. She got me doing things that I never planned. The other day she be up on me, boy, very unsexual, it's so. We've been having wild times for sure. It's not safe, but now I show more. Every time you bring that to you, you my number. Stand, but you don't say, you do, I do the Alabama. Somebody tell me the ball. This guy don't see my go.
When I'm begging her, she know they are, it goes slow, so happy now. When I do that, now you go green, that go. She shutting me up, she giving me styles, different styles, she be my papa. She doing her eye, she making a sound, she casting a spell, bra bra bra.
Greatness. DJ Nazi.
Sweet love, baby, all I need is your love, yeah. Baby girl, nobody happy no, baby girl, what we consign them. Baby girl, keep it on the low, baby girl, not to consign them. Far away, far away, baby. Saku society, I feel like I shy, baby, sweet love. Oh, give me sweet love. Oh, give me more love. Yeah, come give me some sweet love. Come give me some sweet love. Give me sweet love. Yeah, come give me some sweet love. Sweet, yeah. Give me more love. Come give me some sweet love. Come give me some sweet love. Shut up, feel around, chill, chill, check out, Shut up. sweet energy. Find your body one more time, yeah. Sweet, I mean, come close to you, yeah. You like Rocky, used to go around after when you're lonely. I didn't I love you. I know nobody can satisfy